So welcome to Career Conversations with Amanda. I'm here with Dylan today from Hancock Askew and Co. We're going to be talking about how should students communicate in the recruitment process. So Dylan, I'll let you introduce yourself and the company and we can go from there.
All right. Well, thanks for having me, Amanda. Really appreciate you giving us the opportunity to be on here. So we are Hancock Askew and Company. We are a regional public accounting firm. We are started in Savannah, Georgia back in 1910. Was just in Savannah for about 100 years before the leadership decided to expand outside of Savannah. So we opened our Atlanta office, which is actually up here in Peachtree Corners. And then expanded down into Miami, then came Tampa, then Jacksonville, and then Augusta as recently as last year. So we have 6 different offices now across Georgia and Florida. We are just crossed over 250 professionals on staff. So we were actually ranked the 12th fastest growing public accounting firm last year. So pretty proud of that accomplishment and just making sure that that we do what we can to find the right people and put them in the right seat so we can continue this growth pattern.
Great, thanks. So yeah, let's jump into the topic about how students should communicate in the recruitment process. When we think about that recruitment process, what does that entail?
Yeah, so for most of you that are watching this, you probably know that the recruiting process for public accounting or accounting students in general, I should say, starts much earlier than most other majors do in college.
Yes.
So, really the recruiting process starts in the moment that you step foot on campus as an accounting student. We meet students in a variety of different ways. Some students we meet via referral, some we meet at Meet the Firms, accounting career fairs, Beta Alpha Psi meetings. So there's lots of different ways that we get connected with students. So the recruiting process kind of depends on how we meet that student, what age are they, or where are they at in school, I should say. So we kind of take the process from there and deviate a little bit on that based off that student's person or circumstance. As far as the actual recruiting process, usually we meet on person in campus. Maybe we meet on campus. Maybe we meet via handshake. And then usually we'll do a phone screen with myself. So I'm over recruiting for the entire firm for the offices in Georgia. So a phone screen with myself is first. And then from there, we will pass along to the hiring managing team. So sometimes that can be a senior accountant on staff that's really involved with recruiting. Sometimes it could be a partner, could be an office managing partner. So it just kind of depends on what practice and what office we're talking about. But yeah, so that's kind of the recruiting process in a nutshell. And then, we kind of take it, from there. So we have internships, of course. So internships are usually the summer between junior year and senior year, or senior year in their MAC program. And then full-time staff positions, start once they graduate with either their undergrad or their master's, depending on what their educational career looks like as it pertains to their CPA certification.
Great, thanks. Okay.
Yes.
And so how should students communicate in this process? Like what types of communication are important when we're thinking about this?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So, I am, I guess I'm one of a younger millennial, so I am definitely part of the texting generation. So it is not uncommon for me to, get an application for someone or get someone's resume, and like my first way of communicating with them is text message, because I know that that's how I would prefer to be communicated with primarily. So I will do that, but like with most other, positions or industries, I should say, email is king for us. So I know for those of you watching this, you may not get too many emails, and it may just be that you're getting blown up from spam emails from, stores that you signed up with for the loyalty program or whatever else it may be. But I really can't stress this enough. Like, make a habit of checking your email at least 3 to 4 times a day during business hours, because that is how we're going to be communicating with you primarily. Yes, you may get some people who will text you, phone calls, not really as much. Usually if we're going to talk on the phone, we're going to schedule that ahead of time. I'm not ever just going to pick up the phone and call you randomly, because I don't know your class schedule, I don't know your work schedule. Right. But I can't, I really can't stress that enough, is like really prioritize your email, checking your email inbox. Because if I send an email and then it's, 2 or 3 days before I get an email response back every single time that I'm emailing that person, it can be a red flag for us, because one of our fundamentals that we live by here is being a fanatic about response time. So every every form of communication, whether it's a phone call, a voicemail, email, a text message, a pager, if anyone still uses those. But every form of communication has to be returned within 24 business hours. So and most organizations have some sort of stipulation like that as well, where they expect to be responded to regardless of how you're communicated to. So every recruiter and every person that you interact with is going to be different, but I can promise you that email is always going to be the least common denominator and that everyone is going to use it.
Yeah, I agree. And we talk about that a lot. Just in general, for the semester, we put out a biweekly newsletter, and it's like, please open my email so that you have, access to all of those resources and things like that. And I think that as college students, me included, I didn't really think about how often I should be checking that until I got up later in my college career. So junior, senior year, I was checking it almost obsessively. And because when you're involved on campus and stuff too, you have to be accessible that way. But I like the idea that you mentioned that texting, because not everyone does that. And I know, like, as a millennial, I hate being on the phone. And so I appreciate that being able to schedule that call. And so, texting is preferred for a lot of people, especially this generation. So that's good to know.
Yeah, we have a lot of people, baby boomers or Gen X that are still, they still prefer a phone call for sure. If they come and ask me, hey, what's an update on this candidate? I'll say, well, I've texted them and I've emailed them, and, it'll kind of drive them crazy. I'll say, well, why don't you pick up the phone and call them? But in reality is most people nowadays with spam calls and just the kind of societal shift towards, texting and emailing. I'm the same way. If I get a phone call from a number that I don't know, I don't answer it. And if they're important, they'll leave me a voicemail and I'll call them back. So, so that's why I've just always, like, even if I just want to call someone really quick, I'll text them ahead of time and say, hey, this is Dylan with Hancock Askew. Just wanted to see if we could schedule a quick conversation this afternoon, get it on the calendar, call them then, and kind of take it from there. But very rarely, if ever, will I call someone unprompted.
Good to know. Yeah. And I do the same thing with my cell phone. Like if someone calls me and it's a number I don't recognize, I typically don't answer. But my work phone, my office phone, I'll answer every time.
Sure.
And so I guess it just depends on, what level or what number you're giving out and things like that. But definitely important to remember that, there is multiple different ways to communicate. So that's good. Yeah,
absolutely. So, and I guess, another thing that I would just be cognizant of when emailing or texting is just, always be mindful of your texting lingo as well. So, because keep in mind, I'm a millennial and I like to have a good time with everyone too, but, there's, we try to limit LOLs and ha-has and, the letter U's and stuff like that, especially when it's professional, when it's professional conversations that are going to be documented in some capacity. So, so just always be mindful of that, because, some people, I wouldn't mind it so much, but I may have to forward that email to someone who does mind it.
Right.
And so you just want to be mindful of that.
Right. All the texting lingo, OMG, all of that. Yeah, definitely not a professional environment. So that's good to know. So that, goes along with my next question of what should students avoid in terms of communication? So waiting to respond to emails or things like that, and not communicating, or the texting lingo. Is there other things that they should avoid?
Yeah, so for a lot of the students or candidates that I'll text message with, oftentimes they'll read my text at, could be a Thursday night at 11:30 at night, and they'll respond right back then and there. Now, normally I have my phone on silent. Of course, it doesn't bother me that much, but there have been times when I've gotten those texts and it's, my phone's vibrated and it's woken me up or something like that. So I would just, that's not really, that's kind of nitpicky, but I'm just saying, be mindful. Try to respond to everything, whether it's a text or email during business hours. I'm really passionate about not sending emails or communications, really after 5 o'clock, because I think it gives off a bad impression that, if I send an email at 9 o'clock at night, for me as a candidate, I'm thinking, golly, why is the HR guy working until 9 o'clock at night? So, and I don't want to set that precedent, because that's not true. Sometimes I will log into my computer at night. It's never mandatory, but I try to be mindful of the impression that gives off. So, I would tell you as a candidate or a student to kind of look at it as the same way. Like, respond to things. If you get a text from me at 2 o'clock one afternoon and you don't see it until 8 o'clock, it's okay to text me back the next morning. So you don't necessarily have to text me back whatever random hour of the day that it is. And then again, just, reiterating on the texting lingo, because it is a big one. When we're texting, you're just in that mindset that, it's a little bit more informal. And again, you might get a recruiter, you might get a hiring manager that doesn't care about it, and they may even use that texting lingo with you. But that would be the exception, not the rule for the most part.
Yeah, electronic communication is forever. That's another thing to remember too. Is that,
yes.
You might years later, that stuff can still be dug up and things like that. So trying to be as professional as possible, even when we're not prepared for the professional environment entirely yet. So
yes, yes, absolutely. It's a huge piece, and that's why you will find out that every organization values email, and a big reason is for that, is so they can create a paper trail of just about anything that ever needs to be rehashed. So you always keep that in the back of your mind.
Right, and everyone knows what you've talked about, so you don't have to spend time on a Teams call or a phone call filling everyone in about a candidate. You can just say, hey, look, this is all the stuff that we've talked about. Here's a summary of it. What do you think? And so that makes it, I think, easier on the business as well, but also on the candidate to go back and say, okay, here's what I talked about. Here's what I have to consider from this company.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, just to kind of, I guess a final point, a final touch base is, I know most of you that'll be watching this have LinkedIn, and you're probably active on LinkedIn. But I really can't stress the importance of that enough. Me being in a recruiting position, I live on LinkedIn. That's where I find most of my students. If someone messages me on Handshake, the first thing I do is go search for them on LinkedIn. And I would prefer to communicate via LinkedIn over Handshake for the most part. So be mindful of checking your LinkedIn messages too. And reach out. If you see people that work at firms that you're interested in, or organizations that you're interested in, and you see, like for me, my title will say talent acquisition at Hancock Askew. So clearly, if you reach out to me, I can probably put you in touch with someone who's over hiring for a certain position. And don't be afraid to reach out to us unprompted. So, it makes our life a whole lot easier if you find us, as opposed to us having to find you.
And it's not intimidating either. We're all humans,
yes.
As long as you're being professional. Hello, Dylan, my name is so-and-so. I'm interested in whatever. It's a good way to start.
Yeah, and honestly, it almost be the exact opposite. I would think more highly of you that you would do that, because there are so few people who do take that extra step and go out and research these firms and who these people are. So it would honestly give me a greater impression of that person if they were to reach out to me in the beginning. If they just happened across my profile and just wanted to touch base with me, even if they're a freshman, just to kind of ask, what kind of opportunities you have for people just starting their college career. We always value those relationships.
Great. Well, Thank you so much for talking about how we should communicate in the recruitment process with me today.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Amanda.